Hey, what's going on, Salt Lake City dog owners? I'm talking to you if your dog, or you for that matter, are dealing with any sort of anxiety issues, insecurities, aggressions, fear issues, stuff like that. And I know a lot of you are, because here at my company, Ty the Dog Guy, that's one of the biggest things that we work on. And so this video is for you if maybe you're thinking about hiring a dog trainer here in Salt Lake, but you're not quite sure, who to go for. We've got a full 10-part training series. You can go down below this video in the description section, click on the link, and you'll get the full series. We're gonna share with you how we deal with everything from anxiety to aggression to leash pulling to coming when called, and let you know if we might be the right company for you, or even if you're not looking for a dog trainer here in Salt Lake, just to get a whole bunch more great information about how to train your dog. But today we're talking about anxiety, insecurity, fear, aggression, stuff like that. I'm gonna share with you exactly how you can get your dog over it once and for all, even if you've been dealing with it or your dog's been dealing with it for years. So make sure to watch to the end. All right, guys, I want to talk to you about fear, anxiety, aggression, reactivity, things like that. At our company, we deal with hundreds of dogs every year, I'll cut that out. Yeah, we're good. All right, guys, I want to talk about fear, anxiety, aggression, reactivity, all that kind of stuff that's so common. We deal with this. We've dealt with thousands and thousands of cases of this over the years, and so we've got a very deep insight into what causes this. So I'm going to explain kind of why this is caused, what happens to create all this, and then I'm going to explain here in a second what you can actually do to fix it, and how you can use this 10-part series that you're in to actually fix a lot of these fear and aggression issue things. So almost all of the aggression that we deal with is fear-based. And I'm using fear as a broad term. It can be anxiety, insecurity, but I'm going to call it fear-based. Almost all of it's fear-based. Very rarely do you meet a dog who's like, I like to hurt people or hurt, those dogs exist, but most dogs that are being aggressive, whether it's your dog or a dog that you've seen that's lunging and barking, or it's a fear thing, and you add things to it. Fear plus being territorial equals a dog who goes nuts at the window or when somebody rings the doorbell. Fear plus nervousness, fear of other dogs plus, bad leash manners equals a dog who's being reactive on the walk and stuff like that. So fear is at the cause. Fear, anxiety, and insecurity are at the root cause of almost everything that we deal with as far as these aggressive and antisocial behaviors. So fear really comes from two places. And so it comes from the dog's genetics and it comes from the dog's upbringing. So genetics are a big component here. Very frequently people say, well, I think my dog was abused because he's aggressive now. We rescued him. And maybe he was. Sometimes dogs were abused, but oftentimes dogs that were never abused and never had anything bad have fear and anxiety and aggression issues. And how could that be? Well, genetics. Genetics are a big part of our behavior. Like, there are people who run into burning buildings for a living, firefighters, and they enjoy it, and the adrenaline makes them feel excited and stuff like that. And they do something terrifying like all the time, and they're cool with it. It's not a big deal. And then there are other folks who just a little thing happens and everything starts to unravel. They get cut off in traffic, or somebody scares them, boom, and they get really terrified, or whatever the case might be. Genetic components are really big. And oftentimes people are really wrong about this. You'll see this when they're trying to defend a certain breed, like, oh, all dogs of that breed are good unless you train them not to be good. And that's not the case. Genetics are a big component. Like, Labradors don't chase tennis balls because of how they were raised. They chase tennis balls because of their genetics. Border Collies don't herd sheep because of how you raise them. They herd sheep because of genetics. Now, the training you do can enhance the retrieval or the herding or whatever, but the genetics are what they are. And some dogs are more genetically predisposed towards being fearful, anxious, nervous than other dogs. And so oftentimes that's a big component, is genetics. Now, we can't change genetics, but we can enhance the genetics that are there. And so through training and things like that, and I'm going to get into that here in a second on what you can do if your dog has genetic, more fear type issues. Now, the other thing is upbringing. And so experiences that your dog has throughout his life are going to affect fear or lack of fear. So, for example, a lot of dogs that we work with went to dog parks when they were young, and they went to dog parks and they got bullied, or they felt overwhelmed because there was a lot of dogs and they are like, I'm a small dog here, I'm not sure what to do. Or, you know, they got attacked, you know, on an extreme end. And so lots of dogs that go to dog parks end up with fear issues of other dogs because their upbringing wasn't a good one. Don't ever go to dog parks. They're a really bad place to go. Or, you know, I've seen things where, you know, one kid like smacks the dog on the head when it's a puppy and now they're afraid of kids. You know, I've seen all sorts of things like that to where one experience can lead to a lifetime of fear. And then, you know, that leads to issues, and I'll talk about that in a second. But so the experiences that the dog has or doesn't have, if we don't give the dog a lot of positive experiences around people, for example, that could lead to fear because of just simply not knowing that situation. So why is fear so bad? Well, number one, you can probably intuitively know because you don't like to be afraid. But fear is really bad because it leads to only three things in dogs. It leads to the fight response, the flight response, and the avoidance response. So fight response is bark, bark, bark on a low end all the way up to attacking and everything in between. And so a dog doesn't have to actually like go get in a fight to be in the fight response. The fight response is just the aggression, the reactivity, the barking, the lunging. So fear leads to fight because the dog realizes, hey, if I show this aggression, maybe I'll be okay. Whew, and sure enough, it happens and he's okay. Or, you know, the mailman comes to the door, the dog's like, bark, 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 I'm afraid because you're going to break in. And every day the mailman leaves, and so the dog's like, whew, thank goodness I showed that aggression because that got rid of the mailman. But anyways, fear leads to fight, fear leads to flight. Flight is where the dog runs away. You know, the dog gets afraid and like just takes off and runs away. Flight is no good either. We don't want flight. And the reason we don't want flight is because the dog doesn't grow, mentally doesn't grow at all. It just, you know, remains in this state of fear, and flight begets more flight, and fight begets more fight. They tend to lead to more and more and more. And a dog that runs away today is probably running away faster a month from now. And the last one is avoidance. Now, avoidance is the best of the three. Avoidance is when the dog just kind of pretends something's not there. He looks away from it. It's a fear response, but it's a better response. And so there are solutions here, and I'm going to tell you about them here in just 1 second.
Hey guys, I want to do a quick cutaway to talk about what you don't want to do, and I'm talking specifically to you guys in Salt Lake City on what you don't want to do, because I find this to happen time and time again to dog owners in Salt Lake. Big-hearted people that love their animals, but their animals have anxiety, and they try to coddle their dogs through it. And you want to avoid that. It's one of the biggest mistakes that you can do, and it'll hurt your dog, not help your dog. So what I mean by that is the natural tendency that people have when their dog is afraid is to be like, oh, it's okay, buddy, it's okay. And all you're doing is you're feeding into that dog's fear. You know, the dog's afraid, and you're like, good job. And they're like, oh, cool. This is probably what my owner wants. We don't want to do that. You want to follow the formula that I outlined here in this training so that you can avoid making your dog's anxiety
All right, so how do we fix this fear? How do we help the dog through this? How do we work through the aggression and the fear and the anxiety and stuff like that? Well, there's a very simple formula. It's simple, it's just not easy. And so what that formula is the first thing we need to do is we need to elevate the dog's state of mind, and we need to elevate the relationship with the owner. Oftentimes dogs are more fearful when they don't really trust their owners, when the respect and the trust isn't there. And then of course the state of mind, where if a dog is really reactive and everything makes them freak out and stuff like that, that's not going to help either. And so we need to elevate their state of mind, and we need to change the relationship. One big way to do that is through some really great obedience training. And when I say really great, what I'm referring to is a dog who listens to you, even when distracted, whether he's on the leash or off the leash, whatever. That level of obedience helps with both of these things. It helps with the mindset because being obedient comes from a very calm and structured mindset, whereas being aggressive and fight, flight, and avoidance comes from a very hectic and scary mindset. And so these are two opposing mindsets. They don't exist very well at the same time. So, you know, somebody rings the doorbell and your dog freaks out. If we elevate his obedience to where we can send him to his bed, he can't freak out anymore. And in not freaking out, he can learn how to be calm. If we've got a dog who's lunging at other dogs and trying to attack, well, if he walks perfectly by our side, he can't do that anymore. And so using that obedience, we can change his state of mind, but it also really helps with the relationship, because let's say he does heel next to your side instead of lunging. And so he's saying, all right, I really want to lunge at that dog, but I'm going to heel because you told me to. Oh, nothing bad happened. And nothing bad happens again, and nothing bad happens again. And soon the dog realizes, okay, these things weren't as scary as I thought they were. And so that level of obedience is super helpful. What that leads to is the ability to desensitize to things that make the dog fearful. And I've already kind of told you how you do that, is we apply the obedience at moments when the dog is afraid. So he's afraid because somebody rang the doorbell, it's a downstay or it's a place command. He's afraid because he sees another dog, it's a heel command. He's afraid and he wants to chase off after a dog and nip him on the rear end, it's a recall. We can desensitize the dog to these things by exposing him to larger and larger things that make him afraid, while insisting that he stays under control, and that will help to desensitize him and help him realize, look, I know you're afraid of all this stuff, but you don't need to be, because look, now we've passed 10 other dogs and 20 dogs and nothing bad happens. The doorbell's rung 50 times and nothing bad happens. You can trust me. So desensitization can help. And then the last thing is counter conditioning. So counter conditioning is something that you can do when you've got like an outside fearful trigger that you know is going to happen. Like maybe every Wednesday morning, the trash, the big trash truck comes and he's afraid of that sound. You can counter condition by, up until, start giving him treats, start doing sit, start doing down treats. And then as the big garbage truck comes, you keep doing that, and you can kind of counter condition him to the garbage truck. That's just an example, but you can do some of those things with other different fear triggers. Now, counter conditioning by itself is usually fairly weak. You usually need a lot of the obedience and structure, a lot of the things that you've learned in this 10-part course. You need a lot of that obedience and structure, and then counter conditioning can be super helpful. But until then, it's really, once you get that obedience, then you can do some of this counter conditioning. But generally, that's our formula for helping dogs work through fear. And we see dogs gain an enormous amount of confidence, an enormous amount of they feel so much better when we get their obedience levels up, when we desensitize them to the fear triggers that they've got, and then we do some counter conditioning to the fear triggers that they've got. Those types of things do a really great job at helping the dog work through fear. Go try it with your dog.
All right, Salt Lake City dog owners, go work your dog through fears and aggressions. Now, we get a lot of calls from people that need help with fears and aggressions and anxieties and stuff like that. And of course, we're thinking as dog owners how we can help ourselves. But by the same token, this is all about helping our dogs. They can have a so much better life if they can learn how to work through their anxieties and insecurities and aggressions and stuff like that. So make sure that you're actually applying this. Also make sure, if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't done so already, down in the description section, click a link, the link that's in there, and you'll get a free 10-day access to how we do all of our training in Salt Lake City. Lots of transparency in there. We show you everything that we do. So go click that link, grab your free 10-day course, and we'll see you on the other training.